of hot tub has been adopted. I'm not sure if you have been taught the concept of hot tub procedure, because in fact it was notified in the Delhi High Court rules only in the year 2018. And apart from that, we are also doing the Basmati GI litigation matter, which pertains with GI, whether the state of MP can have a GI over the Basmati, which is currently being grown in the areas of Basmati. So these are the most important matters. Apart from that, we do a lot of NCDRC matters and other matters also. So I'll start with patent and which is the FRAN Litigation and Commercial Courts Act. So I just wanted to know, as of now, I'm sure you must have been given a lot of lectures on patent law. So is that true or not?
In first year, we haven't studied patent law yet.
Okay, you haven't studied, but the lectures that you are getting here online, so did you have any idea? Has any one of you taught patent law as of now?
No, but basic idea we have. Yeah.
Okay, so you have basic idea, and since most of you are in the first year, I'm very sure when I was in the first year, by the end of second semester, we had read CPC.
Yes.
So I'm sure you would have read CPC also.
Yeah.
So I'll just start with Commercial Court Act. Some basic points. What are the main difference with CPC? So now just tell me one thing. Is the 90-day limitation of filing a reply under Order 8, Rule 1 in CPC, is that directory or mandatory? Directory. Okay. So, yeah. So I'll tell you, see, so you have three limitations inside that. The first limitation is of 30 days, then 60 days, and then it is 90 days. And whether it is directory or mandatory, we have a lot of cases, but the most important cases are the Salem Advocate Bar Association versus Union of India and Kailash versus Nagpur, which says that even beyond 90 days, the court can allow the a written statement to be taken on record. So Commercial Court Act came in the year 2015. And if you ask me as a practicing lawyer, what is the biggest difference between Commercial Court Act and CPC? So Commercial Court Act is a part of CPC only, but there are some matters which form a part of Commercial Court Act and some are not. So in Commercial Court Act, the initial limitation to file a written statement is 30 days, which can be extended till 120. But after 120, there is no 121st day. If you are not able to file your written statement within 120 days, there is no ground of natural justice. You will have no reason how that you have not filed your written statement within 120 days. So this was challenged, and the Delhi High Court and Bombay High Court has different opinions on this. Delhi High Court says that, okay, this is mandatory, whereas the Bombay High Court says that it was discretionary, the court could have allowed this. So now in 2020, in the month of February, this has been settled by the Supreme Court. And it has let down the law that this 120 days cannot be extended. So if any one of you comes into litigation, so remember this will be the toughest thing to do, because in case you become a patent counsel, so filing a WS for patent matters becomes really challenging within 120 days. So are you interested in knowing the reason exactly why would in CPC there is a limit time period granted even after 90 days, even though there is nothing inside CPC, but in case of Commercial Court Act, why has this been adopted? Yes. So if you will read the Commercial Court Acts, and I would request you to read specifically Order 8 Rule 1, the amendment which has. So in that there is a specific proviso which says that after the expiry of 120 days, the defendant will lose his right to file his written statement, and even the court cannot take that on record. So the Parliament has very deliberately provided a provision over there, which even specifically takes any power from the court, which was not the case in which was not the case in the case of CPC. So this is the biggest difference, 120 days. And though in procedure you have the difference, but this is something which will like haunt you, and this is something which is now the reason why things are going at a relatively faster pace as compared to matters which are in CPC. Since all of you are dealing with intellectual property, so intellectual property is under 21C17. It falls within commercial dispute. So under Commercial Court Act is only applicable to matters which are commercial dispute in nature, and 21C defines exactly what are the matters which will are within the purview of Commercial Courts Act. So intellectual property matters like patent, trademark, each and everything are within Commercial Court Acts by virtue of 21C17. So there are many other provisions also, but if I deal with each and everything, I don't know how many of you would be interested in CPC and Commercial Court Act, because this will be required for hardcore litigators. If people who want to go into in-house or prosecution, I don't really think you have a lot of use of this. But yes, I would say from my experience that though in college I found CPC very boring, but when you would come into practice, CPC is one of the most interesting subject. And the difference between a good lawyer and a bad lawyer is definitely how you understand and you apply CPC. So now I'll try to discuss FRAND litigation or SEP litigation. I'll give you basics of patent so that you understand it. And I'll also use other provisions of Commercial Court Act so that in the limited time which I have been given, I'm able to do justice with the same. So before going into FRAND litigation, I'm sure you must know what exactly FRAND is. FRAND is fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. A FRAND litigation is also known as a SEP litigation. SEP is a standard essential patent. So before going into standard essential patent, I think it would be quite, it is expected on my behalf to exactly explain you what exactly is patent. Since you are in RG, so whenever you go, each and every person would expect you that whether you know other aspects of law or not, patent, you're all masters. Okay, litigation I'll come, but that is like the third or fourth step. Unless and until you don't understand what is patent basically, you won't get into the intricacies of FRAND litigation or SEP litigation. So hello, any one of you who thinks, who is really good at patent, tell me what exactly is patent. So I'll tell you one thing, the rights which have been granted under the patent law, whether it's a negative right or a positive right.
Negative.
The rights which have been granted to the patentee under Patents Act, whether it's a negative right or a positive right. See, rights are of two kinds, positive rights, negative rights. Okay, Mr. Gursimran Singh Narula, you have, your answer is correct, it's a negative right. So see, positive right would be a right when you have a property or anything which says that you can do. If you have you buy a pen, then you can write with that pen, you can further sell that pen. If you have a building, you can rent it, you can lease it, you can do anything with that. But if you read section 48, the way in which it has been crafted, it is a negative right. A patent does not exactly give you the right to do anything directly. It only gives you the right that you can stop other people from using your own patent. And there's a very specific reason why patent right has been drafted in a negative manner and not a positive manner. Now tell you one thing again. Can one patent infringe other patent or not? It's a very stupid question or easy question, but I think even I took a lot of time to understand the nuance of this question. So can one patent, if two different people, if Tarun has one patent and Utsav has one patent, so can, and both are in a relatively similar manner. So Tarun got the patent in 2017, later Utsav gets the patent. So is there any chance that by practicing the patent of Utsav, if Utsav starts using his patent, he might infringe Tarun's patent, or you have understanding that one patent cannot infringe on the patent?
So it would probably depend on the construction of the claim and how the claim is read.
So exactly, there's a possibility that it might infringe, it might not infringe. So as you say, that it will depend upon the facts and circumstances of the case. And therefore, the Patent Act or Section 48, which gives any patentee the right to use a patent, it does not directly give a positive right, but it's a negative right that a patentee can refrain the other people from using it. Now I'll come to the reason basically. So if, let's start with very simple patent of a pencil. Now, if we have a patent for a pen which Tarun has, it's a basic pen. Now after 2 or 3 years, Utsav comes with a patent in which he does some incremental innovation over the refill of a pen so that his pen feels smoother while he is writing, or the writing which you can do. Like if you remember the ad of Flair, there was one pen of Flair Writometer, I think, which says that it can write 10 kilometers. So if you measure that length, so Utsav's pen can write like 20 kilometers and Tarun's pen could only write for 5 kilometers. So if patent right are given in positive way, then what would have happened is both the people could have used it parallelly, and even in case if the second patentee's patent infringes the patent of first patent, the patentee could have taken the plea that the Patent Act gives him the right to use it, whereas the Patent Act in its current form does not give the right to use. So Mr. Utsav can use the patent, but he will always have the chance that any other person can file a suit against him, and he cannot use the plea that he has a valid patent, because having a valid patent does not mean that you cannot infringe it. So Tarun can always sue him. So that is why. But the right which has been granted to Utsav for his patent with the 20 kilometer writing power of the refill is that he can refrain any other person from using that particular technology. So that is the whole concept why with Section 48 of our Patent Act has been crafted in a negative manner. It is not a positive right, it's a negative right. So I think, are you clear with this?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Everyone? Okay, so I'll assume that all of you are clear. In case you're not clear, you can ping me right now or even later. I would love to explain this aspect of patent law or any other aspect of patent law. Now coming to standard essential patents. Now if you see, the concept of a standard essential patent is nowhere written in our patent law. So it is something which is, you can see, borrowed. Now what is the difference between a patent and a standard essential patent? So in India, the whole saga of accessibility litigation has come by the matters of Ericsson only. So, and all of you are using 2G, 3G and 4G phones. So you know what exactly is 2G, 3G or 4G. These are standards. 2G is a standard, 3G is a standard, and 4G is a standard. Now, when you buy any new phone, you would see on the external cover that would be written it's 2G, 3G, 4G, or it's AAC, Advanced Audio Control. So MPEG, AAC, each and everything are standards. Now, what do you mean by a standard? Now, if you use a 3G phone which has like a MPEG, AAC, then it is assumed that all the patents are being used in that particular phone. So to put in another way, for a particular standard, there may be like 50,000 patents. So it is assumed that that particular technology cannot be used without using those standards. So therefore, these are standard essential patent. These are standard because these have, for a particular essential, for practicing a particular standard, this is essential. So if you're using a 4G phone, you cannot use 4G technology in your phone until and unless you are using this particular standard. Any doubt?
Okay.
So good question. Now the biggest problem with SAP litigation or SAP is that SAP, there is no organization for certifying SAP. It's a self-declaration. So for 2G you had ETSI, for 3G you have 3GPP, which is third generation partnership project. So what happens is that if you're any company, any big company, and you have like 10 patents, maybe 10,000 patents, you would simply go on the website of that particular standard to which these particular patents are essential, and then you write in a form that should any person come to you who wishes to use this particular patents, you will give them this particular patent on FRAND terms, that is fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory. That is the only thing by which any patent is declared as a standard. So there is no government entity or any other organization which exactly certifies that your patent is a standard essential patent. It is basically you stating that your patent is a standard essential patent, and therefore when you are a defendant in a standard essential patent or a SAP litigation or a FRAND litigation, you always challenge the essentiality factor of a patent also. So see, in patent, when you are a defendant, you will always challenge the validity of a patent, because grant of a patent does not in any way confer that the patent is valid. Even not prima facie, it is the opposite view as compared to a trademark. Trademarks are always presumed to be valid, patents are not presumed to be valid. So you also challenge the essentiality that in case even if it is proved in the court that your patent is a valid patent, even in that case, the onus will be always on the plaintiff to show that, okay, even if the patent is a valid patent, you need to show that how exactly your patent or your technology is being used to use 2G, 3G or whatever standard it has been being used. So that is the biggest flaw with FRAND litigation or SAP litigation, that there is no entity which exactly certifies. See, there is no time limit as to when a patent will become a SAP. See, a lot of company will have a patents. As of now, consider that patent is not considered being essential. But now when any SSO, that is standard setting organization, makes that particular patent essential for a particular technology, from that day, that particular patent would be treated as a standard essential patent. So it depends when that particular standard comes into existence. So now if you see SAP litigation or FRAND litigation, so FRAND litigation I would say does not exactly pertain to patent law, or in addition to patent law you have other aspects which you need to take into consideration while dealing with the FRAND litigation. So FRAND litigation has basically three facets. One is your negotiations or your contract when two parties are discussing the license terms. So yeah, there's one more difference. For a patent matter, if your patent is a normal patent, it's not a standard essential patent, and you know that any other party is directly infringing your patent, you can simply go into any court and sue the other party for infringement. You can also get your order under Order 39, temporary injunction. But if your patent is a SEP, standard essential patent, and your matter falls within the FRAND litigation, then you cannot directly go and sue the patentee in the court. First, you will have to offer the patentee your patent, and only if the patentee does not do a bona fide negotiation with you, and again, when you offer the patentee your patents, you have to do it on FRAND terms. So I said you, when in any SSO, you submit a form saying that your patent is a SEP. So there's a standard clause in each and every SSO that you will be offering these patents to any subsequent user on FRAND terms. So therefore, there is the onus on the patentees to offer these terms to end users. So you will see I'm not going to discuss any details of my own case, but if you're really interested, you can go to Delhi High Court website from where you can read the orders in Lava, Micromax, Ericsson, Carbon Matters. You would see the initial stage would be that these companies first approached the entities, the Indian handset manufacturers, and only when they thought that they were not negotiating properly, they sued them in the court. And again, I would say FRAND is not something which has been defined in the Indian patent law. As far as SAP is concerned, so for this 2G, 3G and 4G, there is a notification of 2008 of Department of Telecom, which says that in India, in Indian handset network, 2G, 3G and 4G are standard essential. That is, if there is any company which says that its phones are complying with 2G standards or 3G standards, then basically you are infringing all the SEPs related to 2G and 3G. Then, so the first question was that how you negotiate. Second is your own patent act. And apart from that, there is also an aspect of competition law in SEPs. If any one of you has read the provision section 4, that is abuse of dominant position.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, sir. So this is also being challenged in one of the writ petitions. So one of the entities, which is Indian handset manufacturer, had also issued a complaint in the CCI against Ericsson that it is abusing its dominant position. So again, can't diverge more on this. So now we'll come to the basics of FRAND litigation. So in FRAND, if you want to read a judgment, and there's one judgment of Justice Manmohan, which has been pronounced in the case of Ericsson versus Intex, and which again has been challenged before the DB, and the same has been stayed as of now. But if you want to read FRAND, at least that is what the court's view is. I would not exactly confer with the views that has been expressed in this judgment. So fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory would mean that if my favorite subject for today, Tarun, is the owner of thousands of SAPs, and it happens that you students of first year have companies which need to use Tarun's patent. Now, Tarun cannot negotiate his rate with each and every person at a different rate. It has to be reasonable. It has to be equal. It can't be that he will be taking 10% from Utsav and maybe 1% from other person. So there might be some differences based on the size of different companies, but it should be something which should be fair, which should be reasonable. And as of now, there is no judgment which can exactly describe you how a royalty has to be found out in case of India. And there is also nothing which gives you from exactly royalty standards. So you can only look at the provision of section 84, that is compulsory licensing, that it should be available to any person at a decent rate. Otherwise, you can simply, the other option is to simply cut, copy, paste your the jurisprudence from USA. So now when you determine royalty in case of FRAND litigation, there are two concepts. One is that you can have the royalty at the end point. Now see, if you have a patent and that patent is only for screen, or that patent is only for audio, or that patent is for 3G phone, so basically it's only for your internet speed. So there are two ways at looking at it. You can have a royalty of any particular percent at the end product. That is, if you're selling your phone at 20,000 rupees, you can have 1% or 2% at that. Or the other concept is smallest saleable patentable unit. That is only if you have patent on camera, on your earpiece, or on your hardware. So again, we do not have any clarity. We have different judgments on this. So what's your opinion on this? If you have a royalty for any particular patent that is for a component, should you have this on the end product or only on that particular smallest saleable unit?
On the end
Yeah,
product.
the smallest saleable unit. Guri, go on. Guri.
I
Yeah.
believe on the end product.
Okay, so we have a divergence of opinion. So see, we have good reasons for both of them. So as far as the concept of end product goes, so the reason or the logic behind end product is that, see, we are not using any small product. We are using at the end product, and the whole, like, the whatever you enjoy in this phone, the screen quality or the speed, it is only for the end product. A single part of this component does not have any use. So that is, so the overall experience which you are getting at the end is because of those components. So that is one aspect. But the negative of this argument is that if you start giving royalty at each and every part, then just tell me what would be on the end product. So if there's a patent for the audio part, the video part, the screen, you have 1% on. So 20,000, for example, is the price of the phone, and you have various patentees for each and every components. They take 1% on the end product, and there is one aspect in which you only ask them to take the royalty on the subparticles. So in case if you go for the end product, you have no idea how much royalty the company will have to pay, and the whole business will become very unsustainable. And again, the point which I personally believe is why you should have a royalty only on the component and not on the product is that if you have this at the end product, so basically you are also enjoying the or royalty for other products for which you have not used any of your resources. So there comes the issue of royalty. So see, discussing each and every judgment would not be like, I don't have the time for the same, but I would urge you all, even if you want to go in hardcore litigation, in-house or normal litigation, read two judgments. One is a judgment of 15th of March of 2015 in the case of Ericsson and Intex. And then there is one judgment of Vibhu Bakru, again Ericsson versus Intex, which is for a CCI matter. So there is an interplay whether CCI can look into the actions which are being taken by standard essential patent holders or not, which in this case was Ericsson. So if you read these two cases, you will have a basic understanding, and in fact, I would say a very good understanding of what exactly is FRAND, what exactly is SEP, and what exactly is the interplay between patent and competition law. Because see, patent law and competition law in a way are antagonistic. And by antagonistic, I mean that, see, patent law grants you monopoly, whereas the competition law is against monopoly. So how many of you have like read competition law as of now?
So most of the second year and third year people have read it.
Okay. Okay. So at least on patent now, tell me, what is the basic logic behind granting of patent?
So exclusive right, that is the right of patent, is granted in return of public welfare. That is the main logic behind granting a patent, right?
Public welfare or the welfare of the company?
No, exclusive right to the company is granted in return to their disclosure. That disclosure is meant for the public welfare, so that there can be more inventions after that.
So see, what you are exactly saying, we can also in other words say that it is the theory of recoup. So in market, you know, there are two companies of companies. Those who will do innovation and those who will copy those particular things. Now, you know, there is a lot of amount of money which is invested whenever you go for a new product. And now why will any company do any innovation if I launch any particular product, new product on 1st of January, like 2020, and the other company do reverse engineering, and from the 1 month later, they are coming with the same product. So the cost of product for these two companies would be quite different, because the first company or the innovator company would have incurred a lot of money on the innovation. So therefore, to recoup all the money which any company incurs during the R&D, a specific period has been given to it, so that you recoup your money, whatever you had invested. So in a way, it gives the companies the benefit, or it encourages them to further innovate, so that they can make their profit. They can also recoup all the amount which they had invested or they had used for this particular product. And there is one more argument for this. A patent law also helps to create or to help public knowledge. One is that the patentee discloses everything, and second point is, if you read patent and the concept of novelty and obviousness, anything which is in the public domain cannot be patented. You can take this argument another way, that patent law also helps to preserve the public knowledge. Anything which is there in the public knowledge cannot be then monopolized by any company. Whatever you need to monopolize will have to be new. So did you get the point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now for FRAND litigation, so the first, you know now what is FRAND. Market reach does not have any value. See, like all pharmaceutical companies or any pharmaceutical product will have a lot of market reach if it's a blockbuster drug, but it's a not standard drug. Standard SEP is only when you cannot use any particular standard without using that patent. That is only a SEP. Now there are many standards that might not be very popular, so they might not have a very great market reach. Even in that case, that would still be SEP. So SEP, standard essential patent, has got nothing to do with the market reach. It's only whether it is essential to a particular standard or not. And therefore, you would see that whenever a person has to prove in the court that his patent is an essential patent or not, so with the help of his claim, so each and every SSO will have a very detailed guidelines or detailed guidelines of what exactly is a standard patents under its standard. So all this technical details of that particular patent will have to be matched with the claims of that particular patent. And when there is a clear match between the claim of a patent and this technical specification of that standard, that only correlates the essential nature of the patent. So that is the only thing by which you prove the essentiality. Market reach has got no value in this. Now, again, to calculate royalty, you have two approach in SEP litigation. One is top-down approach, one is bottom-down approach. I'll just tell you that, note these, and in case if you are really interested in knowing this, do a Google search. We'll get some cases from US, which will exactly tell you what is a top-down approach and what is a bottom-down approach. Or in case if you want me to explain it, then we will have to have a separate class on the same. So for SEP litigation, I would say that we do not have a very detailed judgment as of now. And the matter which is also going, the Intex versus Ericsson matter, that is it. The evidence stage is now over. So whenever that judgment comes, you can then have a SEP litigation judgment. But till then, I would not say you have a great SEP judgment. So for now, you can only have what is a patent, what is SEP, what are different standards. You will have different standards for each and everything. How do you prove, or if you are a patentee, and how do you approach any defendant? So you cannot definitely go to the court directly. You will have to first offer your particular patent to any end user. If there is not a bona fide negotiation on the part, then only you go to a court. And then also you will have to then establish your validity and essentiality. Now, since some of you have read CPC, now tell me who will have the burden of proof to establish the validity and the essentiality of a patent? Or first tell me what exactly is burden of proof?
Patentee will have to establish the validity first.
No. See, you have a patent, so prima facie the court will still say that it's a valid patent. So the onus for invalidity will be on the defendant. However, for essentiality, the onus will be on the patentee itself to establish whether his patent is an essential patent or not. So first tell me what exactly is burden of proof? First year students, I'm very sure by now you know this.
But it's a legal duty on behalf of, in case right now, if you're dealing with patents, the patentee to show the essentiality, right? And in case if invalidation proceedings are going on, then it's a defendant's legal duty to prove that it's an invalid patent.
Yes, so see, you have a cause of action for any suit, and then patentee will have his own reason, the defendant has his own reason. So burden of proof is basically whatever story you are giving, you need to prove it in the court. Now, when it's the validity of a patent, so basically since you have a certificate with you, so the defendant is challenging the validity. So the burden is on the defendant to prove his case. Whereas in case of essentiality, it's only self-certifying certificate. So first, it's the patentee will have to prove. He will have the burden of proof to show that his patent is an essential patent.
So I have a question regarding the same.
Yeah.
Is there a presumption of validity in case of courts? Because I know there are ex parte injunctions in case of patents, right? But do you, like, if you have to say yes or no, do courts presume that the patent is valid?
See, if asked, giving you a very objective answer, so what is
like
interpretation is that patents, there is no presumption of validity in terms of for a patent. For this, read section 13 of the Patent Act, and this particular question has been dealt by the Supreme Court in the case of Vishwanath Prasad Radhe Shyam. I don't exactly remember the verses, but if you'll read or simply do a Google of Vishwanath Prasad Radhe Shyam case, in that either in para 29 or para 31, it does say that grant of a patent does not give you a prima facie validity of a patent. And therefore, if you will read the cases in case of, then okay. So I'm saying my answer bluntly is that yes, there is no presumption of validity for a patent in India. Read section 13 and then also read the case of Vishwanath Prasad Radhe Shyam. So then your answer would be, or your further question might be, that in that case, any temporary injunction would not or should not be granted?
Must not be granted, let's say. It's not a good practice.
It should not be granted. But even in that case, injunctions are being granted.
And that to ex parte and quiet time.
That to, exactly, that to ex parte ad interim. So yes. So there are a lot of cases, and I think the jurisprudence in this regard is quite well developed. So when any patentee files a case, it will have to show its validity. And if a defendant comes there, so he does not have to prima facie show that the patent is invalid. If you read the cases like TVS versus Bajaj of Division Bench of Madras High Court, Roche versus Cipla Division Bench Delhi High Court, NXC Division Bench of Delhi High Court, on the first stay, since there is a prima facie, it is not believed that patents are valid. The defendant only needs to show that he has a credible challenge to the patent. So there is a difference between a credible challenge and actually showing that the patent is invalid. The threshold is quite low in case of injunction. It is only after a protracted ordeal of trial when you exactly show whether your patent is invalid or not. But as on the first day or as on the date on which you have a hearing on interim injunction, if you read the cases, the defendant has only to show that prima facie the patents are invalid. The ground or that the threshold is not as high as being that you will have to show on the first day only that the patent is invalid.
A supplementary question can I ask regarding the same?
No?
What is your opinion on 6-year rule being adopted by at times Delhi High Court, since you are practicing litigation?
Which rule?
6-year rule, where the court is presuming that since the patent is being used for 6 years continuously, so let's grant an injunction. They have a prima facie case.
Yes, there are some cases in which they have said that. So basically, instead of saying that it's a 6-year rule, you can say that the patent is an old patent which has not been challenged as of now. Therefore, you presume that it's a valid patent. But see, if you simply read the act, there is no presumption of validity. There is also no validity which says that if you have a patent which is on there for 10 years or 20 years, then it's a valid patent, or if there is a patent which is only for 1 year, then it is invalid. And then they say that this patent has not been invalidated by any person. So I would not be of the same view, because my point is that even if there is a patent for 15 years, but I as a company, as a defendant, was not using that particular product. I use my product or launch my product at the fag end at the life of that particular patent in 15th or 16th year. So you can't tell me that why did not you challenge this particular patent when this patent was just granted. I will only challenge this particular patent when I have the necessity to do it, because challenging the validity of a patent is not a very cheap thing to do. It's a very expensive proposition.
Thank you, sir.
So I think this I would say for SEP and commercial court. If you read more on this, and if you have further points on this for patent, that how do you read section 8 or any point, I'll be happy to take any other class. And then we will have to be very focused with all case laws, and it will be really better if I already have the idea that what exactly do you want. Otherwise, these lectures can go in and around for a lot of period. Yeah. No. The analysis will be done by court only. SSO does not done it. SSO does not does it. What is required in this entire case is that the patentee will have to show his own correlation between his claims and the essential features of that particular SSO, and the defendant will show how it is not essential. So the analysis will have to be done by both the parties, and the conclusion would be reached by the court only. It is not the SSO which is going to say exactly whether a patent is essential or not. So if you, and okay, there's one more point which I think is very important in terms of your commercial court act, because since you have told a lot of people would be coming to for litigation, and if you come to litigation, Delhi will be the best place for you. So one major difference also is that under your CPC you can like challenge each and every order, but if you read section 13 of the commercial court acts, the challenge to any order is very limited. Only those orders which are under Order 43 can be challenged. Each and every order which is passed by the court cannot be challenged. So this you will also have to take in consideration. And in a normal CPC matter, if you see, you can directly move to the court for any ex parte hearing, injunction. But under a Commercial Court Act, if you do not have any urgent requirement, then you will have a compulsorily go for a pre-mediation talk. And only if your pre-mediation talk fails, then you reach the court.
Sir, just one general question regarding 12 capital A. How effective have you,
Court Act.
sir, the pre-mediation institution?
Yeah.
How effective has that been so far, and what is its what role will it play in a patent matter? Because most patent matters will already have been discussed by companies multiple times, negotiated over the years. Then what's the point of the pre-mediation in such a matter? How effective has it been from your experience? I'm generally asking.
I would say that generally in case of patent matters, pre-mediation would not be very effective because see, pre-mediation is a requirement only in those cases in which you do not have an urgent requirement. Now in patent, since your patent is being infringed and you are losing money each and every day, so in patent matters, it is really a case that a company goes for a pre-mediation settlement. It will directly go to the court on the ground that it has an urgent requirement, and therefore pre-mediation can be avoided in case of patent litigation. But yes, there are 2 cases in Delhi High Court in which a matter was, before filing the suit, it was filed as a pre-mediation, and in mediation only the defendant agreed to take a license from the patentee.
Thank you, sir. Sir, and in general cases, how effective is pre-institution mediation been, sir? In general?
See, in general, pre-mediation, again, I had done 2 matters in which the defendant was willing or agreed for pre-mediation, and it went on well. In 6 months, we were able to dispose of the matter in mediation only. Now, the problem of pre-mediation would be when you have unscrupulous litigant, and you know that if you go for litigation can take a lot of time. So if the defendant is really willing to settle the matter, indeed, in that particular case, pre-mediation is a very good tool. But in this case, if there is any case in which the defendant is only interested in protracting your litigation, then there would not be any use of this section 12A.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So see, this was only a very brief of FRAND. So if you want any further lecture, then tell me what exactly, read more on this, and then I'll be happy to have one more lecture on this, a much detailed lecture, but I'll be requiring what exactly points do you need on that.
Sir, if you can share your experience with Commercial Court Act, how it has been your experience personally with the act?
See, the biggest, my personal experience with Commercial Court Act is that, what I said to you, 120 days. So for CPC, still expandable, but then you will have to file a written statement. And filing of written statement when it comes to patent matters requires a lot of skill, because for patent matter is only not fact or law. For a patent, first you need to have the patents analyzed. So a lawyer takes a lot of time in filing the written statement in patent matter, because you will have then your external contents, consultants will do an analysis of that particular matter. Apart from that, yes, matters are going at a faster pace in Commercial Court Acts. You have now a separate thing for your whole admission denial of documents, marking of exhibits. You have case management hearing. So I would say that it's better than actual CPC. People are more serious for their matter because there are timelines. Costs are imposed also. On the day of case management hearing, only you will have to give the details of your witnesses. How many witnesses are you giving? And the timeline will have to be given. So timeline, with respect to timelines, I would say that yes, there is hope, or I would say it is going at a better pace as compared to the previous matters.
So, hello.
Yeah.
Sir, sir, in light of the FTC versus Qualcomm, we saw that in US we have a shift than what was there with DOJ and the coming in. So what would you, how Indian markets will be affected? What will be its impact on Indian jurisdiction?
Which case are you talking
Sir,
about?
FTC versus Qualcomm, US.
See, I have read this judgment quite long back, so I think I'll have to get back to you. Right now, I'm not in a position to exactly tell you. It was quite long back that I read this judgment, maybe. So give me some time, then I may come back to you. Okay, so the questions are over. Okay, and yes, those people who have a lot of interest in patent, I will also ask you to read one more judgment. This is P. Kumar versus AstraZeneca. So you would have read a lot about Marcus claims who are in the seniors years. So what exactly is selection patent Marcus claim? Read that particular judgment. So we have worked on that also. And yes, I'm very happy to say that Tarun was also a part in that research while we were there. Tarun? Offline. Okay, so if you have any questions, otherwise we can wrap this. And if you have more questions, and who asked me the questions of FTC was a Qualcomm, I'd like to get back to you.
So I'll ping you, so I'm Divanshu.
Okay. Okay. So I'll get back to you on this. And okay then, thank you. Okay, and take care and read.
Thank you, sir.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you, sir. Bye bye.